What's a secret your family made you keep that still haunts you? When I was 12, my older sister Tessa disappeared for 3 days. My parents told me to say she was visiting an aunt if anyone asked. There was no aunt, she came home bruised and quiet. When I asked what happened, she just said, "Don't ask." Years later, I found out where she'd really been and why the lie had to be maintained. It was September and 7th grade had just started for me. Tessa was 16 and junior. In high school with a small circle of close friends, our house was always quiet. Dad worked long hours at a manufacturing plant, and Mom kept herself busy with community activities. We weren't especially close as sisters, with the 4-year age gap feeling much wider than it actually was. On a Wednesday morning, I woke up to find Tessa's bed empty, which wasn't unusual. She often left early to meet her friends before school, but that evening when I got home, she still wasn't there. Mom was in the kitchen, phone pressed to her ears, speaking in hushed tones. I asked about Tessa after she hung up. Mom told me Tessa was visiting our Aunt Rita in Lakewood for a few days. When I pointed out we didn't have an Aunt Rita, Mom gripped the kitchen counter and instructed me to tell anyone who asked that exact story. No questions allowed, just remember what she told me. Dad came home early that night. He and Mom spoke in their bedroom with the door closed. Their voices rose and fell, though I couldn't make out the words when they emerged. Dad looked pale and angry. When I asked if Tessa was okay, he insisted she was fine and reminded me to remember what Mom had told me. That night, I stood in front of my bathroom mirror practicing the lie about Aunt Rita in Lakewood. I repeated it with different inflections until it sounded natural. I'd never had to lie about something important before. The next day at school, Tessa's best friend Bryn cornered me in the hallway before first period. Her eyes were red and puffy. She demanded to know where Tessa was, saying she wasn't answering her phone. I recited my practice line about Aunt Rita. Bryn stared at me and stated plainly that we didn't have an Aunt Rita. I insisted we did. I claimed she didn't visit much. She started crying right there in the hallway. A teacher approached to ask what was wrong, but Bryn just walked away. I stood frozen, to leave feeling like a stone in my stomach. That evening, Mom received a call that made her grab her keys immediately. She told me to stay home, lock the doors, and not answer the phone. She was gone for hours. I sat on the couch watching the clock, too nervous to eat dinner or do my homework. Around midnight, I heard a car in the driveway. Looking out the window, I saw Dad's car. He helped Tessa from the passenger seat. She moved slowly, keeping her head down. When they came inside, I gasped. Tessa had a dark bruise on her cheek and a split lip. She held her arms tightly around herself as if she was cold, though the house was warm. I ran toward her, asking what happened. She looked at me with empty eyes. "Don't ask," she said. Ken walked straight to our shared bedroom and closed the door. Mom followed after her with a plastic pharmacy bag. Dad sank onto the couch and put his head in his hands. When I tried to question him, it cut me off and reminded me about the Aunt Rita story. That was all anyone needed to know. For 3 days, Tessa stayed in our bedroom with the blinds drawn. She only emerged to use the bathroom. Mom brought her meals on trays that came back barely touched. I slept on the couch because Mom said Tessa needed space. On Sunday night, Mom and Dad had a long conversation with Tessa in the kitchen. I wasn't allowed to join them afterward. Mom informed me that Tessa would return to school the next day. If anyone asked about her bruises, I was to say she fell while hiking with Aunt Rita on Monday. I watched Tessa carefully apply makeup to cover the bruise on her face before school. In the hallways, people stared and whispered. Bryn approached us before first period, her eyes wide at the sight of Tessa's injuries. When she asked what happened, Tessa mechanically replied that she fell while hiking at her aunt's house. Bryn looked like she wanted to say more, but Tessa walked away before she could. Throughout the day, I saw Tessa avoid her usual friends, keeping her head down and speaking minimally. Weeks passed, and slowly things seemed to return to normal on the surface. Tessa went back to her regular schedule. She stopped wearing heavy makeup to cover her face as the bruises faded. But something fundamental had changed. She stopped having friends over. She came straight home after school. She jumped at loud noises. Once, when we were alone in our room, I tried again to ask what really happened when she was gone. Tessa looked at me for a long moment and told me she needed me to never ask that again. It was better if I didn't know. Months passed than years. Tessa graduated and left for college 2 states away. She rarely came home even during holidays. Our parents never pushed her to visit. The questions about those 3 days faded to the background of our family life, but never disappeared completely. I was 18 when pieces of the truth began to emerge, home for my first semester of college for winter break. I was cleaning out my closet when I found an old small box of middle school memorabilia. Inside was my diary from 7th grade with entries about Tessa's disappearance and return. Reading it brought back all my questions. That night, I overheard my parents talking in the kitchen, not realizing I was home. Mom mentioned seeing Oscar's mother at the grocery store, saying his family had moved back to town. Dad immediately asked if she had said anything about Tessa. Mom replied that she had pretended not to see her, which Dad seemed relieved about. I froze in the hallway. Oscar, the name sounded vaguely familiar, but I couldn't place it. Later that night, I searched through Tessa's old yearbooks until I found him. Oscar Reyes, 2 years ahead of Tessa in school. I vaguely remembered him as Tessa's boyfriend during her sophomore year before her disappearance. And the next day, I drove to Bryn's house. We hadn't spoken much since high school, but her parents still lived in the same house, and she was home for the holidays. When we were alone, I asked her about Tessa's disappearance. Bryn looked uncomfortable and said that was a long time ago. I pressed her, asking if she knew Tessa wasn't visiting an aunt. After a pause, she acknowledged that everyone knew there was no aunt, but my parents had made it clear they weren't. She's supposed to ask questions. When I asked if it had something to do with Oscar Reyes, her eyes widened slightly. She seemed surprised I didn't know. Bryn explained that Oscar had been bad news, controlling and jealous. Tessa had tried to break up with him multiple times, but he always convinced her to come back. When I asked if he had hurt Tessa, Bryn said I should really talk to my sister about this. I called Tessa that night. She sounded surprised to hear from me. We rarely spoke on the phone. I told her I needed to know what happened when I was 12 when she disappeared for 3 days. After a long silence, she asked why I was asking about this now. I explained that I was tired of not knowing, tired of having lied for her for years without understanding why eventually. She said she would come home the next weekend so we could talk in person. Tessa arrived on Friday evening. She looked different. Her hair was shorter, and she carried herself with more confidence than I remembered. We waited until our parents went to bed before sitting at the kitchen table with mugs of tea. When I asked her to tell me everything, Tessa took a deep breath and began explaining. She had been with Oscar, though not willingly at first. They had broken up the week before and he hadn't taken it well. He convinced her to meet him to talk things through. When she arrived, he was with 2 friends. They took her phone and forced her into a car. They took her to a hunting cabin Oscar's family owned outside of Lakewood. Oscar told her they would stay there until she came to her senses and got back together with him. When she tried to leave the first night, he hit her. That explained the bruises on her face and split lip. I asked why her parents hadn't gone to the police. Tessa explained that she had begged them not to. Oscar's father was a cop and his uncle was a judge. His family had connections. Oscar made it clear that if she told anyone, no one would believe her, or worse, they would. And his family would ensure our parents suffered for it. On the 3rd day, Oscar's friends left to get more beer. When Oscar fell asleep, Tessa found his phone and called our father. Dad drove out there with his friend Dan, a former boxer. They got her out. It wasn't as simple as Oscar just letting her go. Dad and Oscar's father had a conversation and made an arrangement. Oscar's family agreed to keep him away from Tessa if our family didn't press charges or tell anyone what happened. Part of that arrangement was maintaining the story about Aunt Rita. I expressed disbelief that everyone just pretended nothing happened after Oscar had kidnapped and beaten her. Tessa bitterly explained the reality of small-town politics. Oscar's family had money and influence. Ours didn't. It wasn't fair, but it was reality. I asked if that was why she hardly ever came home. She confirmed that Oscar had moved away for college, but his family remained in town. Every time she returned, she feared running into them or him. When I mentioned that Mom had said his family moved back to town, Tessa's hands tightened around her mug. She said that was why she agreed to talk about this. I deserved to know in case I ever saw him. She warned me to stay away from Oscar and his family. When I asked if he still posed a threat, Tessa said she didn't know, but hoped not. The fact that they had moved back concerned her. She advised me to be careful. The next morning, Tessa was already packed to leave. When I asked why she was leaving so soon, she claimed she had worked the next day, but I could see the real reason in her eyes. Being in town brought back too many painful memories. We hugged goodbye longer than usual. She apologized that I had to lie for her back then and that I carried this all these years. After she left, I told my parents that Tessa had explained everything about Oscar in the cabin. They exchanged a look I couldn't interpret. Mom admitted they should have told me when I was older, but after a while, it seemed easier to just not talk about it when I asked if they were ever going to tell me. Dad looked tired and said, "Probably not. Some secrets become part of the foundation of a family." 2 weeks later, I was shopping at the local grocery store when I noticed a man staring at me from the end of the aisle. He was in his 30s with dark hair and a carefully groomed beard. Something about his gaze made my skin crawl. As I turned to leave, he approached. He asked if I was Tessa's sister, Monica. I froze, suddenly understanding who I was talking to. I tried to move past him, but he blocked my path. He asked how Tessa was doing these days, adding a comment about her still telling lies about him. I felt angry and told him I knew what he did to her. Oscar smiled, but his eyes remained cold. He claimed the 3 days they spent together at his family's cabin were Tessa's idea. He said she made up the other story when she regretted it. When I insisted that wasn't true, his smile widened. He told me to ask Tessa about letters she supposedly wrote him afterward about phone calls. He claimed they had a connection that scared her, and it was easier to make him the villain than admit what she really wanted. A store employee approached asking if everything was okay. Oscar stepped back and smoothly said he was just catching up with an old friend's family to me. He added that I should tell Tessa he said hello and that I thought about those 3 days off, and that night I called Tessa and told her about the encounter. She immediately denied writing letters or calling Oscar afterward. I assured her I knew he was lying. I explained that he was in town and had remembered me even though I was just a kid when everything happened. Tessa said she needed to call our parents because they needed to know Oscar was approaching me. The next day, Dad called Oscar's father. The arrangement was revisited. Oscar's father claimed his son was only in town briefly and would be leaving soon. Dad made it clear that if Oscar contacted me again, the old agreement would be void. A week passed without incident. Then one evening, I returned home to find a small package on the porch addressed to me. Inside was a worn spiral notebook. I recognized it immediately as the type Tessa used in high school. Opening it, I found pages of entries in Tessa's handwriting describing a very different version of those 3 days. One where she willingly went with Oscar where the bruises came from an accident, where she fabricated the kidnapping story to avoid getting in trouble for running away. The last page contained a note in different handwriting. The truth has many versions. I knew immediately that the journal was a fake, a convincing one but still a fabrication. The handwriting was close to Tessa's but not quite right. Some phrases didn't sound like her at all. It was a calculated attempt to make me doubt her story. I called Tessa again and described the notebook. She told me to burn it. This was what Oscar did, twisted reality and created doubt. It was how he controlled her back then. When I asked if we should go to the police, she questioned what evidence we had. A fake journal, how would deny sending it would be her word against his, just like before. That night I lit a fire in our backyard fire pit and watched the notebook burn page by page. 2 days later, Mom received a call from Oscar's mother. The conversation was brief, but afterward Mom looked relieved. She told me they were leaving town for good this time. His father had gotten a job offer in Arizona. When I asked if she believed them, she said she wanted to, but we would stay vigilant. Months passed without any further contact from Oscar or his family. Slowly, the tension eased. Tessa even came home for Thanksgiving, the first holiday she'd spent with us in years. As we sat around the table, I noticed how she no longer flinched at unexpected noises, how she laughed more freely than I remembered.